Chapter 1. The cottage looked smaller than I remembered, though maybe it was just me who had changed. The last time I'd stood on this patch of earth, I'd been 17, sunburned, barefoot, and convinced the world was waiting for me. Now, with a box of my belongings digging into my hip and exhaustion clinging to my bones, the cottage felt like something else entirely, less a place and more a question I wasn't sure I knew how to answer. The late afternoon light softened everything it touched. The shingles, once a deep slate gray, had faded to a gentle silver. Sea mist curled around the roofline like a cat settling in for a nap. The porch railing, worn smooth by decades of storms and salt, creaked softly as I set my hand on it. It felt familiar. Comforting. Like the cottage was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. I wasn't sure if I was imagining that. The key my aunt had left me slid easily into the lock. The door opened with a sigh, as though the house had been waiting for me, not impatiently, but with a kind of quiet hopefulness. I stepped inside, and the scent hit me immediately: lavender, old books, and the faintest trace of sea air. My aunt's scent. It wrapped around me so suddenly that I had to stop in the doorway, letting the memories wash over me in slow, gentle waves. The living room was exactly as I remembered. Cozy, cluttered in a way that felt intentional rather than messy. A faded quilt draped over the back of the couch. A stack of books on the coffee table, their spines cracked from love rather than neglect. Seashells lined the windowsill, smooth, ridged, spiraled, each one chosen with care. I used to sit on this very floor and sort them by color, pretending they were treasure. I set my bags down and wandered deeper into the room, touching things without meaning to. A ceramic mug shaped like a whale. A framed photograph of my aunt standing on the beach, her hair wild in the wind, her smile bright and unrestrained. A jar of sea glass in shades of blue and green, glowing softly in the light. Everything felt familiar, but distant, like a dream I'd once had and only half remembered. The kitchen was small but warm, with pale yellow cabinets and a window that looked out toward the ocean. I could hear the waves from here, soft, rhythmic, steady. A heartbeat I hadn't realized I'd missed. I opened the window, letting the cool breeze wash over me. It carried the scent of salt and something else, something sweet, almost floral. I breathed it in deeply, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over me. It had been a long time since anything felt peaceful. I unpacked slowly, letting the quiet fill the space around me. The cottage didn't feel empty. It felt paused, like it had been waiting for someone to press play again. I moved through the rooms, reacquainting myself with the creaks in the floorboards, the way the light slanted through the windows, the faint hum of the old refrigerator. By the time I finished, the sun had dipped low, painting the sky in shades of peach and lavender. The ocean outside shimmered like liquid glass. I stood at the window for a long moment, watching the tide creep closer to the shore. The waves rolled in with a soft hiss, then retreated, leaving behind a lace of foam. Something tugged at me then, a gentle pull, like a hand brushing against mine. Not physical, but unmistakable. A feeling I couldn't name. Restlessness, maybe. Or curiosity. Or something deeper, something older. Before I could talk myself out of it, I slipped on my shoes and stepped outside. The air was cooler now, the breeze carrying a hint of coming night. The path to the beach was narrow, lined with dune grass that whispered as I passed. The sky darkened with each step, stars beginning to blink awake overhead. The sound of the waves grew louder, more insistent, until I reached the edge of the sand. The beach stretched out before me, quiet and empty. The tide was rising, the water inching closer with each breath. I walked along the shoreline, letting the cool sand sink beneath my feet. The ocean glowed faintly under the moonlight, silver and soft. And then I felt it again, that sensation of being watched. Not in a threatening way. More like being noticed. As if someone's gaze rested gently on me, curious but cautious. Protective. I turned slowly, scanning the shoreline. At first, I saw nothing but the curve of the beach and the dark silhouette of the cliffs. But then, in the distance, a figure stood at the water's edge. Tall. Still. Facing the sea. My breath caught, though I couldn't explain why. Something about him felt familiar, though I was certain I'd never seen him before. The wind tugged at my hair as I took a hesitant step forward. The figure didn't move. I blinked. And he was gone. The beach was empty again, the waves whispering softly as they crept closer. A shiver ran through me, not fear, but something else. Something like recognition. Like the echo of a memory I couldn't quite grasp. I stood there until the tide touched my toes, cold and insistent. Only then did I turn back toward the cottage, my heart beating a little too fast, my thoughts tangled in questions I didn't know how to ask. Back inside, I locked the door and leaned against it, listening to the distant roar of the sea. The cottage felt different now, not less safe, but less solitary. As if someone else had stepped into the story without asking permission. I climbed into bed, pulling the quilt up to my chin. The window was cracked open, letting in the sound of the waves. I closed my eyes, but sleep didn't come easily. My mind kept drifting back to the figure on the beach, the way he'd stood so still, so silent, as if he belonged to the tide itself. Eventually, exhaustion won. The last thing I heard before sleep pulled me under was the steady rhythm of the ocean, rising and falling like a breath. And somewhere in that rhythm, I thought I heard footsteps. Chapter 2. I woke before the sun, the soft gray light of dawn filtering through the curtains like a whispered invitation. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was. The ceiling above me was unfamiliar, slightly slanted, painted a pale blue that reminded me of sea glass. Then the distant sound of waves reached me, steady and rhythmic, and everything came back in a slow, gentle rush. The cottage. The beach. The figure I'd seen last night. I sat up slowly, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. The quilt pulled around my waist, warm and comforting. Outside, the world was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt intentional, as if the morning were holding its breath. I dressed quickly, drawn by a restlessness I couldn't explain. The air was cool when I stepped outside, crisp enough to make me shiver. The sky was a soft wash of pink and lavender, the sun still hidden below the horizon. The path to the beach felt different in the early light, more open, less mysterious. The dune grass brushed against my legs as I walked, whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. When I reached the sand, the tide was low, revealing tide pools scattered like mirrors across the beach. I crouched beside one, watching tiny crabs scuttle beneath rocks and small fish dart through the shallow water. The world felt delicate, suspended in a moment that didn't belong to anyone but me. But even in the peaceful stillness, I felt it again, that faint tug, like a thread tied loosely around my heart, pulling me toward the water. I stood and scanned the shoreline, half expecting to see the figure again. But the beach was empty, the only movement the slow, steady breathing of the sea. I told myself I'd imagined him. A trick of the light. A shadow. A memory. But the certainty didn't stick. I walked along the water's edge, letting the cold waves lap at my ankles. The ocean felt alive beneath my feet, as if it recognized me. As if it were waiting. By the time I returned to the cottage, the sun had risen fully, casting golden light across the sand. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the waves roll in. The figure from last night lingered in my mind, refusing to fade. There had been something about him, something familiar, though I couldn't place it. I tried to shake the feeling, but it clung to me all day. By evening, the restlessness had grown into something sharper, something that hummed beneath my skin. I checked the tide schedule on my phone, high tide at 8:14 p.m. The numbers felt significant in a way I couldn't explain. As the sky darkened, I found myself standing at the edge of the porch, staring toward the beach. The air was cooler now, the breeze carrying the scent of salt and something else, something faintly metallic, like the moment before a storm. I walked down the path slowly, my heart beating a little too fast. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silver glow across the sand. The tide was rising, inching closer with each breath. And then I saw him. He stood exactly where he had the night before, at the water's edge, facing the sea. The moonlight illuminated him in a way that made him look almost unreal. His posture was relaxed but alert, as if he were listening to something I couldn't hear. I stopped several feet away, unsure whether to approach. My pulse fluttered in my throat. He turned his head slightly, as though sensing me. When his eyes met mine, something inside me shifted softly, quietly, like a door opening. "You came back," he said. His voice was low, smooth, and strangely familiar. It wrapped around me like a warm blanket, soothing and unsettling all at once. "I wasn't sure if you were real," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. A faint smile touched his lips, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm real enough." I stepped closer, drawn to him in a way that felt instinctive. The sand was cool beneath my feet, the waves whispering softly as they crept closer. "What are you doing out here?" I asked. He turned his gaze back to the horizon. "Watching." "For what?" He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched between us, not uncomfortable, but heavy with something unspoken. Finally, he said, "The sea changes quickly. It's important to pay attention." I frowned slightly. "Do you live around here?" His smile deepened, though it still held that hint of sadness. "In a manner of speaking." I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. Instead, he looked at me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "You shouldn't be out here alone at high tide," he said softly. "Why not?" His expression shifted, something like worry flickering across his features. "Because the ocean is unpredictable." I crossed my arms, trying to steady myself. "I grew up here. I know the ocean." He shook his head slowly. "Not like this." A chill ran through me, though the air was mild. "What does that mean?" He hesitated, as if weighing his words. "It means you should be careful." I opened my mouth to ask more, but he stepped closer and the question dissolved on my tongue. He was taller than I'd realized, his presence both calming and overwhelming. The moonlight caught in his eyes, turning them a shade of blue I'd never seen before, deep, luminous, almost otherworldly. "How do you know my name?" I asked quietly. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "I know many things." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." The tide surged suddenly, a wave rushing up the shore and splashing against our feet. I gasped and stepped back, but he didn't move. The water swirled around his ankles, glowing faintly in the moonlight. He turned to me again, his expression unreadable. "You should go home now." "Why?" "Because the tide is falling." I blinked, confused. So I can't stay when it does." Before I could respond, the water receded, pulling back toward the sea. And as it did, he began to fade, not step away, not disappear into the darkness, but dissolve, like mist caught in a breeze. "Wait," I reached out instinctively, but my hand passed through empty air. He was gone. The beach was silent again, the waves whispering softly as they crept back toward the shore. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding, my mind racing. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what he was. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would be back tomorrow night. Chapter 3. I spent the next morning pretending I wasn't waiting for nightfall. I made tea. I unpacked the last of my boxes. I rearranged the books on the shelves twice, then a third time when I realized I'd put them in order of color instead of genre. I swept the porch, though it didn't need sweeping. I even tried to read one of my aunt's old novels, but the words blurred together, my mind drifting back to the beach, to the man who had dissolved into mist as the tide fell. By noon, I gave up pretending. I pulled out my phone and searched for the tide schedule again, even though I'd memorized it the night before. High tide at 8:47 p.m. The numbers glowed on the screen, steady and certain, like a promise. The restlessness hummed beneath my skin all day, a quiet vibration I couldn't shake. Every time I glanced toward the window, I half expected to see him standing there, watching the sea from the edge of the yard. The thought should have unsettled me. Instead, it made my heart beat a little faster. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I didn't even know his name. I didn't know what he was. But the memory of his voice lingered in my mind, soft and steady, like the tide itself. "You came back," he had said, as if he'd been waiting for me. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, I was already pacing the living room. The cottage felt too small, too quiet, as if it were holding its breath along with me. I grabbed a sweater and stepped outside, letting the cool evening air wash over me. The path to the beach felt familiar now, the dune grass brushing against my legs like old friends. The sky darkened with each step, stars beginning to shimmer overhead. The sound of the waves grew louder, more insistent, as if calling me forward. When I reached the sand, the tide was already rising, the water inching closer with each breath. The moon hung low, casting a silver glow across the beach. And there, exactly where he had been the night before, stood the man. He was facing the sea again, his posture relaxed, but alert, as if listening to something only he could hear. The moonlight illuminated him in a way that made him look almost unreal, his silhouette sharp against the shimmering water. I hesitated for a moment, my heart fluttering in my chest. Then I stepped forward. He turned his head slightly, sensing me before I spoke. When his eyes met mine, something inside me settled, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. "You're early," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "I didn't want to miss you," I admitted before I could stop myself. His smile deepened, though it still held that hint of sadness I didn't understand. "You wouldn't have." I moved closer, the sand cool beneath my feet. The waves whispered softly as they crept toward us, the water glowing faintly in the moonlight. "Do you always come at high tide?" I asked. "Yes." "Why?" He looked back at the horizon, his expression thoughtful. "Because that's when I can." I frowned slightly. "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed softly. "It isn't." We stood in silence for a moment, the only sound the steady rhythm of the sea. The air felt charged, as if the night itself were listening. "Can I ask you something?" I said finally. "You can ask," he replied, his voice gentle. "How do you know my name?" He didn't look at me. "I've known it for a long time." "That's not possible." He turned then, his gaze meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "There are many things you don't know yet." "Then tell me." He shook his head slowly. "Not tonight." Frustration flickered through me, but it was quickly overshadowed by something else, something softer, more vulnerable. "I feel like I've seen you before," I said quietly. "Like I know you." His expression shifted, something like pain crossing his features. "You did," he said. "Once." "When?" He hesitated, then looked away. "When you were very young." A memory stirred at the edge of my mind, sunlight on the water, laughter, a shadow standing at the shoreline. A friend I'd told my aunt about, one she'd insisted was imaginary. My heart thudded in my chest. "That was you." He didn't answer, but the silence was enough. I took a step closer, drawn to him in a way that felt instinctive. "Why did you stop coming?" His jaw tightened. "I wasn't supposed to speak to you." "Not then." "Not now." "Then why are you here?" He looked at me again, and this time there was no sadness in his eyes, only something fierce and unspoken. "Because you came back." The tide surged suddenly, a wave rushing up the shore and splashing against our feet. I gasped and stepped back, but he didn't move. The water swirled around his ankles, glowing faintly in the moonlight. He watched the sea with a wary expression, as if expecting something to rise from the depths. Then he turned to me, his voice low and urgent. "You need to be careful," he said. "The ocean is changing." "What does that mean?" "It means you shouldn't be out here alone." "I'm not alone," I said softly. His gaze softened, just for a moment. "No," he murmured. "You're not." The tide began to fall then, the water pulling back toward the sea. And as it did, he stepped away from me, his form beginning to blur at the edges. "Wait," I reached out, but my hand passed through empty air. He was fading, dissolving like mist caught in a breeze. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said, his voice already distant. And then he was gone. The beach was silent again, the waves whispering softly as they retreated. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding, my thoughts tangled in questions I didn't know how to ask. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know what he was. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I would be back tomorrow night. Chapter 4. The storm arrived without warning. One moment, the sky was a soft, muted gray, the kind that made the ocean look like brushed steel. The next, clouds rolled in from the horizon, thick, heavy, and fast, like a curtain being pulled across the world. The wind picked up, rattling the windows of the cottage, and the air shifted, charged with a strange electricity that made the hairs on my arms stand on end. I stood at the kitchen window, watching the first drops of rain splatter against the glass. They were fat and cold, sliding down in uneven trails. The ocean churned violently, waves rising higher than I'd ever seen them. The tide was coming in too quickly, too forcefully, as if something beneath the surface was pushing it forward. A knot formed in my stomach. I told myself it was just a storm. Coastal towns saw them all the time. My aunt used to sit on this very porch and watch them roll in unbothered. But this storm felt different, wilder, more purposeful. As if the sea itself were restless. As if it were angry. The wind howled, shaking the cottage. I stepped back from the window, my heart pounding. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to shake the uneasy feeling settling in my chest. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Or who. But I couldn't stay inside. I grabbed my raincoat and stepped out onto the porch. The wind whipped my hair around my face, and the rain stung my cheeks like tiny needles. The sky was nearly black now, the clouds swirling overhead in a way that made my breath catch. The ocean roared. I hurried down the path toward the beach, my boots sinking into the wet sand. The waves crashed violently against the shore, sending sprays of salt water into the air. The tide was already higher than it should have been, far higher than any storm tide I'd seen before. And then I saw him. He stood in the surf, the water swirling around his legs, his posture rigid and unyielding. The wind tore at his clothes, but he didn't move. He faced the sea with a stillness that seemed impossible in the chaos around him. "Hey!" I shouted, though my voice was nearly swallowed by the storm. "What are you doing?" He didn't turn. I stumbled closer, the wind pushing against me with every step. The sand shifted beneath my feet, and the waves surged dangerously close. When I was only a few yards away, he finally looked over his shoulder. His eyes glowed faintly in the storm's darkness, blue, bright, and filled with something I'd never seen in them before. "Fear. You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. You're the one standing in the ocean during a storm. I yelled back, breathless. What are you doing? He turned fully then, and the sight of him made my heart stutter. He looked drained, pale, as if the storm were pulling something from him with every wave that crashed against his body. I'm holding it back, he said. Holding what back? He shook his head, his jaw tightening. Go home. No, I said, stepping closer. Tell me what's happening. The wind howled louder, and a massive wave rose behind him, taller than any I'd ever seen. It crashed down with a force that made the ground tremble. He didn't flinch. He didn't even blink. When the water receded, he swayed slightly, as if the effort of standing had cost him something. Please, he said, and the desperation in his voice made my chest tighten. Go. I hesitated, torn between fear and the inexplicable pull I felt toward him. But another wave surged forward, nearly reaching my knees, and instinct forced me back. I stumbled up the beach, my heart pounding, my clothes soaked through. I turned once more, watching him stand against the storm like a lone sentinel. The ocean raged around him, but he remained unmoving, unyielding. Protecting something. Or someone. Me. The storm lasted through the night. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, listening to the wind batter the cottage. The lights flickered again and again, but somehow stayed on. I couldn't stop thinking about him, standing in the surf, facing the sea with that strange, luminous determination. By morning, the storm had passed. The world outside was eerily quiet, as if the ocean were catching its breath. I stepped outside, the air cool and damp. The beach was littered with debris, seaweed, driftwood, and dozens of dead fish scattered across the sand. Strange shells, spiraled and iridescent, lay in clusters near the waterline. I'd never seen anything like them. A shiver ran through me. I walked slowly along the beach, scanning the shoreline for any sign of him. But he was nowhere to be found. The ocean looked calm now, deceptively so, its surface smooth and glassy. When the tide began to rise again that evening, I returned to the beach, my heart pounding with anticipation. He appeared as the water crept closer, materializing from the mist like a memory taking shape. He looked exhausted, his shoulders slumped, his eyes dimmer than usual. You shouldn't have been out here last night, he said softly. You were out here, I countered. That's different. How? He hesitated, then looked away. The sea is waking. A chill ran through me. What does that mean? It means you're not safe. I stepped closer, my voice barely above a whisper. Why me? His jaw tightened. Because you were never meant to come back here. The words hit me like a wave, cold, sharp, and disorienting. What are you talking about? I asked. He didn't answer. The tide began to fall, and his form flickered at the edges, the way it always did when the water receded. Wait, I said, reaching out instinctively. But he was already fading. Go home, he said, his voice distant. Please. And then he was gone. I stood alone on the beach, the waves whispering softly at my feet, my heart tangled in fear and longing and 1,000 unanswered questions. The sea was waking. And, somehow, impossibly, it wanted me. Chapter 5. The next day passed in a haze of questions I couldn't answer. I tried to distract myself, cleaning the kitchen, reorganizing the pantry, even attempting to fix the loose hinge on the bathroom door, but nothing held my attention for more than a few minutes. My thoughts kept circling back to the storm, to the strange shells scattered across the sand, to the way he had stood in the surf as if he were holding the ocean back with nothing but his will, and to the fear in his eyes when he told me I wasn't safe. By late afternoon, I gave up pretending I could think about anything else. I sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, watching the waves roll in and out. The ocean looked deceptively calm, its surface smooth and glassy, reflecting the pale blue sky. But beneath that calm, I felt something, an undercurrent of tension, like a held breath. I checked the tide schedule again. High tide at 9:12 p.m. The numbers felt heavier tonight, weighted with something I didn't want to name. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, I felt the familiar pull, soft but insistent, like a hand brushing against mine. I stood, my heart already beating faster, and walked down the path toward the beach. The air was cool, the breeze carrying the scent of salt and damp earth. The dune grass rustled softly as I passed, whispering secrets I couldn't quite hear. The sky darkened with each step, stars beginning to shimmer overhead. The sound of the waves grew louder, more rhythmic, as if calling me forward. When I reached the sand, the tide was rising, inching closer with each breath. And there, exactly where he always stood, was the man. He looked different tonight. Tired. His shoulders were tense, his posture rigid, as if he were bracing himself for something. The moonlight cast a pale glow across his face, highlighting the shadows beneath his eyes. He turned as I approached, and for a moment, something like relief flickered across his features. "You came," he said softly. "I always do," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked away, his jaw tightening. "You shouldn't." I stepped closer, the sand cool beneath my feet. "You keep saying that, but you never tell me why." He didn't answer. The waves crept closer, swirling around his ankles. The water glowed faintly in the moonlight, casting shimmering reflections across his skin. He looked like he belonged to the sea, like he was carved from it. "Tell me what's happening," I said, my voice trembling. "Please." He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. When he opened them again, they were filled with something I couldn't name: fear, sorrow, longing. "You weren't supposed to come back here," he said quietly. "Not ever." "Why not?" "Because the sea remembers you." A chill ran through me. "What does that mean?" He hesitated, then turned to face the horizon. The ocean stretched out before us, vast and dark, its surface rippling with secrets. "There's something beneath the waves," he said. "Something ancient. Something powerful." My breath caught. "The storm." "It wasn't just a storm," he said. "It was a warning." I swallowed hard. "A warning for who?" "For you." The words hit me like a wave, cold, sharp, disorienting. "Why me?" I whispered. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and the intensity in his gaze made my heart stutter. "Because you're connected to it," he said. "To the sea. To what sleeps beneath it." "I don't understand." "You will," he said softly. "But not tonight." Frustration flared in my chest. "Why won't you tell me the truth?" He stepped closer, the air between us charged with something electric. "Because once you know, you can't unknow it. And I don't want to be the one who takes your peace away." "My peace?" I let out a shaky laugh. "I haven't had peace since the moment I saw you." His expression softened, a flicker of something warm and painful crossing his features. "I know." The tide surged suddenly, a wave rushing up the shore and splashing against our feet. I gasped and stepped back, but he didn't move. The water swirled around him, glowing faintly, as if drawn to him. He looked down at the waves, his expression darkening. "It's getting stronger." "What is?" "The pull." I took a step closer, my heart pounding. "Tell me who you are." He hesitated, then exhaled slowly. "I'm a guardian." "A guardian of what?" "The tide. The coastline. The boundary between what sleeps beneath the sea and the world above it." I stared at him, my mind struggling to process his words. "You're not human." "No," he said softly. "Not entirely." "Then what are you?" He looked at me with eyes that seemed older than the ocean itself. "I'm a tide guardian. Bound to the sea. Bound to protect this place." "And me?" I whispered. His expression shifted, something like guilt flickering across his features. "Yes," he said. "You most of all." My breath caught. "Why me?" He looked away, his jaw tightening. "Because your family has always been tied to the sea. Your aunt knew that. Your mother did too." A memory stirred at the edge of my mind: sunlight on the water, laughter, a shadow standing at the shoreline. A friend I'd told my aunt about, one she'd insisted was imaginary. My heart thudded in my chest. "When I was little, I used to see someone on the beach." He closed his eyes. "I know. That was you." "Yes." "Why?" "Because I was assigned to protect you," he said. "Long before you were born." The world tilted beneath my feet. "I don't understand," I whispered. "You don't have to," he said gently. "Not yet." The tide began to fall then, the water pulling back toward the sea. His form flickered at the edges, the way it always did when the tide receded. "Wait," I said, reaching out instinctively. He stepped back, already fading. "Go home," he said softly. "Please." "Will you be here tomorrow?" He hesitated, then nodded. "As long as the tide rises, I'll come." And then he was gone. I stood alone on the beach, the waves whispering softly at my feet, my heart tangled in fear and longing and 1,000 unanswered questions. A tide guardian. A creature beneath the waves. A connection I didn't understand. The sea was waking. And somehow, impossibly, I was part of it. Chapter 6. Sleep didn't come easily after he told me the truth, at least, the small, carefully measured portion of it he was willing to share. I lay awake long after midnight, listening to the waves crash against the shore, each one sounding closer than the last. The cottage creaked softly around me, settling into the night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something outside was awake. Watching. Waiting. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were filled with water. Not frightening water, not the kind that drags you under and steals your breath. This water was warm, familiar, almost gentle. It wrapped around me like a memory, pulling me deeper into a world where everything shimmered in shades of blue and silver. I heard a voice calling my name, soft and melodic, like a song carried on the wind. I followed it. And then I woke up standing in the hallway, my hand on the front door. A jolt of fear shot through me. I didn't remember getting out of bed. I didn't remember walking here. The door was unlocked, the night air seeping through the cracks. My heart pounded as I stepped back, forcing myself to breathe. Sleepwalking. I'd never done that before. I locked the door, double-checked it, then triple-checked it before returning to bed. But sleep didn't come again. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the ocean calling me softly, insistently, like a lullaby meant only for me. The next morning, I felt heavy, as if I'd been swimming all night instead of sleeping. My limbs ached, and my head throbbed with a dull, rhythmic pulse that matched the waves outside. I made coffee and sat by the window, staring at the shoreline. The tide was unusually high for morning. The waves reached almost to the dune grass, leaving behind trails of foam that glistened in the sunlight. Something about it felt wrong, off balance, like the ocean was leaning closer than it should. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, trying to steady myself. The cottage felt too quiet, too still, as if it were holding its breath again. I couldn't shake the feeling that the sea was waiting for me. By afternoon, the restlessness had grown unbearable. I wandered the cottage, touching objects without seeing them, my mind drifting back to him again and again. His voice. His eyes. The way he'd said I wasn't safe. The way he'd said he'd known me since childhood. I found myself standing in front of an old photograph on the bookshelf, one of me as a little girl, sitting on the beach with my aunt. I was smiling, my hair tangled from the wind, my hands full of seashells. But what caught my attention wasn't me. It was the shadow behind us. A tall, slender shape standing at the water's edge. I'd never noticed it before. It could have been a trick of the light, a rock formation, anything. But something inside me whispered otherwise. I traced the outline with my fingertip, my heart pounding. "You did," he had said. Once. A memory stirred, faint, fragile, like a seashell buried beneath the sand. A voice calling my name. A hand brushing mine. A figure standing in the surf, watching over me. I pressed the photograph to my chest, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't imagining him. By evening, the pull toward the beach was stronger than ever. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It felt like gravity, like something inside me was tethered to the water, drawing me closer with every passing minute. I checked the tide schedule again. High tide at 9:38 p.m. The numbers glowed on the screen, steady and certain, like a heartbeat. As the sky darkened, I stepped outside, the cool air brushing against my skin. The path to the beach felt different tonight, more alive, as if the dune grass were leaning toward me, urging me forward. The breeze carried the scent of salt and something else, something sweet and haunting, like the echo of a song I couldn't quite remember. When I reached the sand, the tide was already rising, the waves glowing faintly under the moonlight. And there, standing exactly where he always stood, was the man. He turned as I approached, and the moment our eyes met, something inside me settled. The restlessness eased, replaced by a warmth that spread through my chest like sunlight breaking through clouds. "You look tired," he said softly. "I didn't sleep well." His expression darkened. "Did you dream?" I hesitated. "Yes." "Of the sea?" "Yes." He stepped closer, his gaze searching mine. "Did it call to you?" A shiver ran through me. "How did you know?" He exhaled slowly, as if the answer pained him. "Because I felt it." "You felt my dreams?" "I feel everything you feel," he said quietly. "Your fear. Your longing. Your restlessness." My breath caught. "Why?" "Because we're connected," he said. "More deeply than you realize." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. "What does that mean?" He looked away, his jaw tightening. "It means the sea is pulling you toward it. And I'm trying to pull you back." The waves surged suddenly, rushing up the shore and swirling around our feet. The water glowed brighter now, shimmering with an otherworldly light. I gasped and stepped back, but he didn't move. He stood firm, his posture tense, as if bracing himself against the tide. "It's getting stronger," he said, his voice low. "The creature beneath the waves. Its influence. Its hunger." I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to steady my breathing. "Why me?" "Because you're part of this place," he said. "Part of the sea. Part of what sleeps beneath it." "I don't understand." "You will," he said softly. "But not tonight." I stepped closer, drawn to him in a way that felt instinctive. "You keep saying that." Because I'm trying to protect you. From what? From the truth, he said. From the sea. From myself. My heart twisted. You're not dangerous. He looked at me then, and the pain in his eyes made my breath catch. I am, he whispered. You just don't see it yet. The tide surged again, higher this time, the water swirling around his legs. He closed his eyes, his expression strained, as if he were fighting something inside himself. Are you okay? I asked, stepping forward. He shook his head. I can feel it waking. I can feel it reaching for you. I hesitated, then reached out, my hand trembling. Let me help. He opened his eyes, and for a moment, something like hope flickered in them. He took a step toward me, the water glowing around him, and when he spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. You already are. The tide began to fall then, the water pulling back toward the sea. His form flickered at the edges, the way it always did when the tide receded. Don't go, I said, my voice breaking. I have to, he said softly. But I'll be here tomorrow. And then he was gone. I stood alone on the beach, the waves whispering softly at my feet, my heart tangled in fear and longing and a connection I didn't understand. The sea was calling me, and he was the only thing holding me back. Chapter 7. The next morning felt wrong from the moment I opened my eyes. The air inside the cottage was heavy, thick with a dampness that clung to my skin. The windows were fogged over, though it wasn't cold outside. The ocean's roar was louder than usual, deep, rhythmic, almost hungry. I lay still for a moment, listening. The waves crashed in a pattern that felt deliberate, as if the sea were trying to speak. I pushed the blankets aside and stood, my legs unsteady. The floorboards were cool beneath my feet, and the faint scent of salt drifted through the cracked window. I walked to it slowly, wiping away the condensation with my sleeve. The tide was higher than it should have been. Much higher. The waves reached almost to the dune grass, leaving behind trails of foam that glowed faintly in the early light. The ocean looked restless, its surface rippling with an energy that made my heart tighten. Something was happening. Something he had warned me about. I dressed quickly, my hands trembling as I pulled on my sweater. The cottage felt too small, too quiet, as if it were holding its breath again. I stepped outside, the cool morning air brushing against my skin. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, streaked with thin clouds that moved too quickly. The beach was empty, but the sand was disturbed, deep grooves carved into it, as if something massive had shifted beneath the surface during the night. I knelt beside one, running my fingers through the damp sand. It was warm. A shiver ran through me. I stood slowly, scanning the shoreline. The ocean churned violently, waves rising and falling with unnatural force. A shadow moved beneath the surface, large, dark, and unmistakably alive. My breath caught. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. The shadow moved again, closer this time, and the water bulged upward as if something enormous were pushing against it from below. I turned and ran. The rest of the day passed in a blur of fear and anticipation. I tried to distract myself, cleaning, cooking, pacing the cottage until my legs ached, but nothing eased the tension coiled inside me. Every time I glanced toward the window, I expected to see the ocean rising up to swallow the land. By evening, the sky had darkened, clouds gathering on the horizon like bruises. The air felt charged, electric, as if a storm were brewing beneath the surface of the sea rather than above it. I checked the tide schedule again. High tide at 10:04 p.m. The numbers felt ominous tonight, heavy with meaning. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and stepped outside. The path to the beach felt different, narrower, as if the dune grass had grown taller, leaning inward like watchful sentinels. The breeze carried the scent of salt and something else, something metallic and sharp, like the moment before lightning strikes. When I reached the sand, the tide was already rising, the waves glowing faintly under the moonlight. And there, standing exactly where he always stood, was the man. But tonight, he looked different. His posture was tense, his shoulders rigid, his gaze fixed on the horizon with an intensity that made my breath catch. The moonlight cast a pale glow across his face, highlighting the shadows beneath his eyes. He looked older, somehow worn, as if the weight of the ocean pressed down on him. He turned as I approached, and the moment our eyes met, something inside me twisted. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and strained. "You always say that," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "And I always come anyway. This time is different." I stepped closer, the sand cool beneath my feet. "Tell me what's happening." He hesitated, his jaw tightening. "It's waking." "What is?" "The creature beneath the waves." A chill ran through me. "I saw something this morning." "A shadow." He nodded slowly. "It's searching for you." My breath caught. Why me? Because you're connected to it, he said. To the sea. To the magic that binds this place. I don't understand. You will, he said softly. But not tonight. I shook my head, frustration and fear swirling inside me. You keep saying that. But I need answers. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and the pain in his eyes made my heart ache. If I tell you everything, you'll never be the same. Maybe I'm not the same already. He exhaled slowly, as if the truth weighed heavily on him. The creature is ancient. Older than the sea itself. It sleeps beneath the waves, dreaming of the world above. But sometimes, it stirs. And now it's awake. Yes. Because of me. Because of your bloodline, he said. Your family has always been tied to the sea. Your aunt knew that. Your mother did too. I swallowed hard. What does it want? You, he said simply. Your presence. Your magic. I don't have magic. You do, he said softly. You just don't know it yet. The waves surged suddenly, a massive swell rising from the depths. The water bulged upward, forming a dark, shifting shape beneath the surface. I gasped and stumbled back, my heart pounding. He stepped in front of me, his posture protective, his eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. Stay behind me, he said. What is that? I whispered. The creature, he said. It's close. The shadow moved again, closer this time, and the water churned violently. The air crackled with energy, the wind whipping around us in frantic gusts. Can you stop it? I asked, my voice trembling. He hesitated. I can hold it back. For now. For how long? He looked at me, and the answer was written in his eyes. Not long. A wave crashed against the shore, spraying us with cold, salty water. He flinched, his expression tightening, as if the impact had hurt him. You're connected to it too, I realized. Aren't you? Yes, he said. But not in the way you are. What does that mean? It means I was created to protect you, he said. To protect this place. To protect the boundary between the sea and the world above. And if the creature wakes fully, then the boundary breaks. And you. He looked away, his jaw tightening. I'll be pulled back into the sea. Forever. My breath caught. No. It's the only way to stop it, he said softly. If I return to the sea, I can seal it away again. But you'll lose yourself. Yes. You'll lose your memories. Yes. You'll lose me. He closed his eyes, pain flickering across his features. I was never meant to love you. The words hit me like a wave, cold, sharp, devastating. But you do, I whispered. He opened his eyes, and the truth was there, shining in them like moonlight on water. Yes, he said. I do. The tide surged again, higher this time, the water glowing brighter as it reached for us. He stepped closer, his hand brushing mine, and the touch sent a jolt of warmth through me. I don't want to lose you, I said, my voice breaking. You won't, he whispered. Not tonight. The tide began to fall then, the water pulling back toward the sea. His form flickered at the edges, the way it always did when the tide receded. Come back tomorrow, I said, my voice trembling. I will, he said softly. As long as the tide rises, I'll come. And then he was gone. I stood alone on the beach, the waves whispering softly at my feet, my heart tangled in fear and longing and a love I wasn't ready to admit. The creature was awake. The sea was calling. And he was slipping away. Chapter 8. The wind changed first. It swept across the coastline in a long, low sigh, cooler than it should have been, carrying the scent of salt and something darker, something metallic and ancient. I felt it before I heard anything, a shiver that ran down my spine and settled at the base of my neck like a warning. The cottage lights flickered once, then steadied. Outside, the sky was an unsettling shade of gray, thick clouds rolling in from the horizon like a wall of smoke. The air felt heavy, charged with a strange electricity that made my skin prickle. I stood at the window, watching the ocean churn. The waves were too high, too violent, crashing against the shore with a force that made the ground tremble. The tide was rising faster than I'd ever seen, racing toward the dunes as if something beneath the surface were pushing it forward. My heart pounded. This was it. The night he'd warned me about. I grabbed my sweater and stepped outside, the wind whipping my hair around my face. The path to the beach felt narrower than usual, the dune grass bending sharply under the force of the storm. The sky darkened with every step, thunder rumbling in the distance like a heartbeat. When I reached the sand, the sight stole my breath. The ocean was alive. Not in the usual way, not the gentle rise and fall of waves, not the rhythmic breathing of the tide. This was different. The water bulged upward in massive swells, glowing faintly beneath the surface, as if lit from within by something ancient and restless. And he was there, standing in the surf, facing the sea, his posture rigid and unyielding. The wind tore at his clothes, the waves crashing violently around him, but he didn't move. He looked like a statue carved from moonlight and shadow, beautiful, fierce, and heartbreakingly alone. "Hey!" I shouted, though my voice was nearly swallowed by the storm. "I'm here!" He turned slowly, and the moment our eyes met, something inside me cracked open. His eyes glowed faintly blue, bright, and filled with a mixture of fear and relief. "You shouldn't have come," he said, his voice strained. "I'm not leaving you." He shook his head, stepping toward me as the waves surged higher. "You don't understand. It's too dangerous." "I don't care." "You should." A massive wave rose behind him, taller than any I'd ever seen. It crashed down with a roar, spraying us both with icy water. He staggered slightly, and the sight of him faltering sent a jolt of fear through me. "You're hurt," I said, rushing toward him. "I'm weakening," he admitted, his voice barely audible over the storm. "The creature is awake. It's pulling at the tide, pulling at me." The water around us glowed brighter now, swirling in strange patterns that made my skin crawl. The air crackled with energy, the wind howling like a living thing. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't bear, soft, sorrowful, resigned. "I have to go back." "Back where?" "To the sea." No, the word tore out of me, raw and desperate. "You said if you go back, you'll lose yourself." "I know. You'll lose your memories." "Yes. You'll lose me." His expression twisted, pain flickering across his features. "I was never meant to love you," he whispered. "But I do. More than I should." A sob caught in my throat. "Then stay." "I can't." He stepped closer, cupping my face in his hands. His touch was warm despite the cold wind, grounding me in a way nothing else could. "If I don't go, the creature will rise. It will destroy everything. There has to be another way." "There isn't." The tide surged again, rising past our knees now, the water glowing with an eerie, otherworldly light. The ocean roared, the sound vibrating through my bones. He looked back at the sea, his expression shifting, determined, resolute, heartbreakingly brave. "It's time," he said. "No," I whispered, grabbing his arm. "Please, don't leave me." He turned back to me, his eyes softening. "I'll always find you," he said. "In every tide. In every wave. I'll be there." And then he stepped into the water. The sea responded instantly, rising up around him like a living thing. His form began to shimmer, the edges blurring as if he were dissolving into the tide. Panic surged through me. "Wait," I cried, stumbling forward. "You can't do this alone." He looked at me one last time, his expression filled with a love so fierce it stole my breath. "I have to." "No," I said, my voice breaking. "If you go, I'm going with you." Before he could stop me, I ran into the waves. The water surged around me, cold and powerful, pulling me under with terrifying force. I heard him shout my name, distant, desperate, but the ocean swallowed the sound. The world became water and darkness, swirling around me in a dizzying blur. I reached out blindly, my fingers brushing something warm, his hand. He grabbed me, pulling me close as the sea dragged us deeper. His arms wrapped around me, holding me tight as the world dissolved into shimmering blue light. "I'm here," he whispered, his voice echoing strangely in the water. "I won't let you go." And then everything went still. The storm faded. The roar of the ocean quieted. The world around us shifted. We were sinking into something deeper than water, something ancient, luminous, and alive. The creature's realm. And we were going straight into its heart. Chapter 9. The world dissolved into blue. Not the blue of the sky or the sea as I'd always known it, but something deeper and ancient, luminous shade that pulsed like a heartbeat. It wrapped around me in soft, shimmering currents, warm and strangely gentle, as if the ocean itself were holding me close. I didn't feel like I was drowning. I didn't feel afraid. I felt suspended, weightless, as though the water had become air, and I was drifting through it with no need to breathe. His hand was still wrapped around mine. That was the only thing that felt solid, the only anchor in a world that had become fluid and dreamlike. His grip was firm, steady, grounding me even as everything else shifted and swirled around us. "I've got you," he whispered, though his voice sounded different here, echoing, layered, as if the water carried it in ripples. I turned toward him, my vision adjusting slowly to the strange, glowing realm. He looked changed. Not entirely human, not entirely something else. His skin shimmered faintly, as if lit from within. His hair floated around him like strands of silver. His eyes, those impossibly blue eyes, glowed with a soft, ethereal light. He was beautiful in a way that made my chest ache. "Where are we?" I asked, though the words felt strange on my tongue, as if the water translated them into something the realm could understand. He looked around us, his expression tense. "Between worlds," he said. "The creature's domain. The place where the sea dreams. The place where the sea dreams." The phrase settled over me like a whisper, familiar and foreign all at once. The water around us pulsed gently, glowing brighter with each beat, as if responding to his presence. Or mine. I looked down at my free hand, startled to see faint light trailing from my fingertips, dissolving into the water like ink. "What's happening to me?" He squeezed my hand gently. "You're connected to this place," he said. "More than you know." Before I could ask what he meant, the water shifted. A shadow moved in the distance, massive, slow, deliberate. The water darkened around it, the glow dimming as if the creature absorbed the light. My heart lurched, fear slicing through the dreamlike calm. He stepped in front of me instinctively, his posture protective. "Stay behind me." "What is that?" I whispered. "The creature," he said. "It's close." The shadow moved again, closer this time, and the water trembled with its presence. The realm around us pulsed in response, the current swirling faster, the light flickering like a candle in the wind. I clutched his arm, my breath catching. "Can it see us?" "It can sense you," he said. "It always could." "Why me?" He turned, his expression softening despite the danger surrounding us. "Because you're part of this place," he said. "Part of the sea. Part of the magic that binds it." "I don't understand." "You will," he said gently. "But right now, we have to stop it." The shadow surged forward, the water churning violently. A low, resonant sound echoed through the realm, deep and mournful, like a whale's call twisted into something darker. I flinched, pressing closer to him. "What do we do?" He looked at me then, and the answer was written in his eyes: pain, fear, love, and something else. Something ancient. "We face it together," he said. The creature rose from the depths, its form shifting and indistinct, more shadow than substance, more presence than shape. It loomed above us, massive and terrifying, its edges dissolving into the water like smoke. I felt its attention settle on me. A cold, heavy weight pressed against my chest, as if the creature were reaching inside me, searching for something it recognized. My vision blurred, the water around me darkening. "I can't," I gasped, clutching his hand. He pulled me closer, wrapping his arms around me. "Look at me," he said, his voice firm despite the tremor beneath it. "Stay with me." I forced my eyes open, meeting his gaze. The glow in his eyes brightened, spreading through the water like a beacon. The creature recoiled slightly, the shadow rippling. "You're stronger than it," he said. "Stronger than you know." "I'm not," I whispered. "You are," he insisted. "Because you're not alone." The water pulsed around us, responding to his words. Light spread from his body, flowing into mine, intertwining like threads of silver and blue. Warmth flooded my chest, pushing back the cold weight of the creature's presence. Memories surfaced, sunlight on the water, my aunt's laughter, the feeling of sand beneath my feet, the sound of waves whispering my name. And him. Always him. A shadow on the shoreline. A voice in the wind. A presence I'd felt long before I understood it. The creature surged forward again, its shadow enveloping us. But this time, I didn't flinch. I reached out, not with my hand, but with something deeper. A memory. A feeling. A connection. The water responded instantly, glowing brighter, swirling around us in a protective spiral. The creature hesitated, its form flickering. "What are you doing?" he whispered, awe in his voice. "I don't know," I said. "But it feels right." The light grew stronger, spreading outward in waves. The creature let out a low, mournful sound, its shadow shrinking, retreating. The realm trembled, the currents shifting as if the very fabric of the place were changing. "You're binding it," he said, his voice soft with wonder. "With your memories. Your love." The creature sank deeper into the water, its form dissolving into darkness. The realm brightened, the glow returning, stronger than before. "It's going back to sleep," he said. "You're putting it back to sleep." I exhaled shakily, the tension draining from my body. The water around us calmed, the currents slowing to a gentle drift. The light dimmed to a soft, steady glow. He turned to me, his expression filled with something I couldn't name, something tender and reverent. "You saved us," he said. "No," I whispered. "We saved each other." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. His touch was warm, grounding me in a way nothing else could. "I won't forget this," he said softly. "I won't forget you." Before I could respond, the realm began to shift again. The water brightened, the currents swirling around us like a gentle embrace. "It's pulling us back," he said. "To the surface." I clung to him, fear and relief mingling in my chest. "Don't let go." "Never," he whispered. The light grew brighter, enveloping us completely. The water dissolved into warmth, into air, into sunlight. And then, I opened my eyes. We were lying on the beach, the morning sun warm on my face, the waves whispering softly at our feet. He was beside me, solid, breathing, human. And for the first time, he wasn't fading. Chapter 10. The first thing I felt was warmth. Not the warmth of sunlight exactly, but something softer, like the lingering heat of a blanket pulled fresh from the dryer. It wrapped around me gently, coaxing me toward consciousness. For a moment, I didn't open my eyes. I floated in that warmth, suspended between sleep and waking, unsure where one ended and the other began. Then I heard the waves. Soft, rhythmic, familiar. I inhaled sharply, my eyes fluttering open. The sky above me was pale blue, streaked with wisps of white cloud. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the sand. The air smelled of salt and seaweed and something sweet, something like home. I was lying on the beach. And he was beside me. He lay on his back, one arm stretched toward me, his fingers brushing mine. His chest rose and fell in slow, steady breaths. His skin was warm, sun-kissed, no longer shimmering with that otherworldly glow. His hair was damp, clinging to his forehead. His clothes were soaked, but he looked human. Completely, undeniably human. My breath caught. "Hey," I whispered, my voice trembling. His eyelids fluttered, then opened slowly. When his eyes met mine, something inside me broke open softly, quietly, like a tide washing over sand. He smiled. It was small, tired, but real. More real than anything I'd ever seen. "You're awake," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "So are you," I whispered. He turned onto his side, propping himself up on one elbow. His gaze swept over me, checking, searching, as if making sure I was truly there. Truly safe. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No," I said, shaking my head. "Are you?" He hesitated, then looked down at his hands. He flexed his fingers slowly, as if testing them. "I don't think so." "You're solid," I said, reaching out tentatively. He caught my hand gently, threading his fingers through mine. His touch was warm, steady, unmistakably human. "I am," he said softly. For the first time in a very long time. Emotion swelled in my chest, thick and overwhelming. "What happened?" He exhaled, his thumb brushing the back of my hand. "You happened." I blinked, confused. "Me? You broke the curse," he said. "When you reached for me in the creature's realm, when you anchored me with your memories, your love, it changed everything." My heart stuttered. I didn't know what I was doing. "You didn't have to," he said. "You just had to feel it." The waves rolled in gently, brushing against our feet. The tide was calm now, peaceful, almost sleepy. The ocean felt different, as if the creature's presence had sunk deep into slumber again. "What about the creature?" I asked quietly. "It's asleep," he said. "Bound by your memories. Your connection to this place. It won't wake again for a long time." Relief washed over me, warm and dizzying. "And you?" He looked at me then, really looked at me, and the tenderness in his gaze made my breath catch. "I'm free," he said. The words hung between us, soft and fragile. "Free from the sea?" I whispered. "Yes. Free to stay." He smiled, and this time it reached his eyes. "Yes." A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. He reached out and brushed it away with his thumb, his touch gentle. "But there's one thing," he said, his voice softening. My heart tightened. "What?" "I'm still connected to the ocean," he said. "Not bound to it, but tied to it. Like a thread that can't be cut." "Does that mean you'll disappear again?" "No," he said quickly. "Not unless I'm pulled too far from the sea. I need an anchor." "An anchor?" He nodded. "Something to keep me grounded. Something to remind the sea that I belong here now." "What kind of anchor?" He hesitated, then smiled sheepishly. "A bowl of seawater by the door would do." I stared at him for a moment, then laughed, a soft, breathless sound that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. "That's it?" I asked. "That's it." I shook my head, still laughing. "I can do that." He leaned closer, his forehead resting gently against mine. "I know." The waves whispered softly behind us, the tide rising and falling in a steady rhythm. The world felt quiet, suspended, as if holding its breath for us. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine. "You saved me," he said. "You saved everything." "I didn't do it alone." "No," he agreed. "We did it together." We sat there for a long time, Our hands intertwined, the sun warming our skin. The ocean stretched out before us, vast and calm, no longer threatening but familiar, like an old friend finally at peace. Eventually, he stood and offered me his hand. I took it, letting him pull me to my feet. We walked up the beach together, our footsteps leaving twin trails in the sand. When we reached the cottage, he paused at the door, looking at it with a mixture of wonder and longing. "This feels like a beginning," he said softly. "It is," I whispered. Inside, the cottage was warm and quiet, the air filled with the faint scent of lavender and sea air. I walked to the kitchen, filled a bowl with seawater, and placed it gently by the door. He watched me with a soft smile, his eyes glowing not with magic, but with something far more human. Hope. He stepped toward me, his hand brushing mine. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For choosing me." I shook my head, tears pricking my eyes. "You chose me first." He pulled me into his arms, holding me close. His heartbeat was steady against my cheek, warm and real and impossibly comforting. Outside, the tide whispered softly against the shore. Inside, he whispered my name like a promise. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely, undeniably home.